Before we begin, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps bring more soothing stories your way. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. The icy wind cut through the dimly lit streets as Megan locked the door of the diner. The neon sign buzzed faintly behind her, casting a warm glow over the snow-dusted sidewalk. It had been another long day of serving regulars and dealing with the occasional grumbler, and she was ready to retreat to her tiny apartment. But as she turned to leave, a shadowy figure caught her eye. Seated on the bench outside the diner was a man bundled in layers of mismatched clothing. His head hung low, his face obscured by a tangled mess of hair and a scruffy beard. A threadbare coat barely shielded him from the biting cold. Beside him was a tattered bag and an old weather-beaten hat. Something about him made her pause. She had seen homeless people before, but there was something different about him. Something broken, yet dignified. Megan hesitated. She'd been warned about talking to strangers, especially ones who might be desperate. But as she watched him shiver against the cold, her heart clenched. She could almost hear her mother's voice in her head. "Always help if you can, Meg. You never know the battles someone's fighting." Taking a deep breath, she stepped back into the diner and filled a styrofoam container with steaming stew and bread. Grabbing a cup of hot coffee, she exited and approached the man cautiously. "Hey," she called out softly, her voice carrying over the whistling wind. The man stiffened but didn't look up. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, holding out the food. He slowly raised his head and Megan's breath hitched. His eyes, deep, dark, and impossibly expressive, pierced through her. They were weary, yes, but there was something else there. Something she couldn't quite place. Gratitude? Shame? Fear? "Thank you," he rasped, his voice hoarse as if he hadn't used it in days. He hesitated before taking the food, his hands trembling slightly. Up close, Megan noticed details she hadn't seen before. The slight tilt of his jaw, the faint trace of an accent when he spoke. "No problem," she replied, smiling faintly. "It's cold out. You should get somewhere warm." The man chuckled bitterly, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "If I had somewhere to go, I wouldn't be here." Megan felt a pang of guilt for her careless suggestion. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," he interrupted, his tone softening. He looked at the food in his hands, then back at her. "You didn't have to do this. People usually just walk past." "Well, I'm not people," she said with a small shrug. "I'm Megan. And you are?" He hesitated for a moment, as if trying to recall his own name. "John," he said finally, though it sounded more like a question than an answer. "Nice to meet you, John," Megan said, her voice warm. "If you're around tomorrow, I'll bring you something else." John's lips quirked into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I might just take you up on that." Megan nodded, then turned to leave. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hauntingly familiar about him. She glanced back one last time. He was eating the stew slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the first meal he'd had in days. That night, as Megan lay in bed, she replayed the encounter in her mind. Who was John? How had he ended up on that bench? And why did it feel like she knew him from somewhere? Little did she know, the man she had just met would soon turn her world upside down.
Yeah.
The next evening, the diner was bustling with its usual crowd of truckers, families, and the occasional lone patron. Megan was rushing between tables, refilling coffee mugs and taking orders, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the man she'd met the night before. As her shift neared its end, she glanced out the window and felt her heart skip a beat. He was there again. John sat at the same bench, his posture hunched against the cold. This time he seemed even more withdrawn, his fingers trembling as they clutched the thin blanket she had given him the night before. Megan felt a wave of sympathy crash over her. Without hesitation, she prepared another hot meal and grabbed a fresh blanket from the back room. Stepping outside, she called softly, "Hey, John." He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to quiet relief. "You came back." "Of course I did," she said, handing him the food and blanket. "I couldn't let you freeze out here." He took the offerings with a faint smile. "You've already done more than most people ever would. Thank you." Megan sat down on the bench beside him, ignoring the biting chill. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and studied him for a moment. His face was gaunt, his beard scruffier than she'd realized in the dim light the night before. But there was a sharpness in his eyes now, a flicker of intelligence that seemed at odds with his current situation. "John," she began cautiously, "how did you end up here? You don't seem like someone who's been on the streets for long." He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the steaming cup of coffee in his hands. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I woke up a few weeks ago in an alley downtown. No memory of who I am or how I got there." Megan frowned. "No memory at all? Nothing?" "Bits and pieces," he said, rubbing his temples. "Flashes of things. A boat, music, faces I don't recognize. It's like trying to remember a dream that slips away the moment you wake up." She didn't know what to say. Amnesia? It sounded like something out of a movie. Yet the pain in his voice and the haunted look in his eyes told her he was telling the truth. "Have you seen a doctor?" she asked gently. John shook his head. "No money, no ID, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. What if I don't like what I find out?" Megan's chest tightened at his words. The idea of not knowing who you are, of being utterly alone in the world, was unimaginable to her. She wanted to help him, but how? What could she possibly do to fix something like this? "Well," she said after a moment, "you can't just sit out here every night. It's too cold, and you'll make yourself sick. The diner's always looking for extra help, even if it's just cleaning tables. Maybe I can talk to my boss and—" "No," John interrupted quickly, shaking his head. "I couldn't take charity like that. You've already done enough." "It's not charity," Megan insisted. "It's a job, and you'd be helping us, not the other way around." He hesitated, his gaze meeting hers. For a long moment, he seemed to weigh her offer, his pride warring with his desperation. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, if you're sure it won't cause trouble for you." Megan smiled, feeling a flicker of hope. "I'll talk to my boss first thing tomorrow. And in the meantime, you can sleep in the storage room tonight. It's not much, but it's warm." John looked at her with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and disbelief. "You're something else. You know that?" "Yeah, I get that a lot," she said with a playful smirk. "Come on, let's get you inside before you turn into a popsicle." As they headed into the diner together, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that this small act of kindness was the beginning of something much bigger. She had no idea how right she was. John proved to be a diligent worker. Though he was quiet and kept to himself, he was polite to the customers and meticulous in his work, wiping down tables with precision and organizing the diner's supplies with an efficiency that impressed even Megan's grumpy boss, Mr. Parker. "Where'd you find this guy?" Parker grumbled one afternoon as he watched John mop the floor. "He's got the hands of a surgeon, not a janitor." Megan shrugged, though she had often wondered the same thing. John's refined demeanor and quick wit didn't match the image of a man who'd been living on the streets. He spoke with a slight British accent that became more pronounced when he was tired or frustrated, and there was a sophistication to his speech that hinted at a life far removed from his current circumstances. One afternoon, Megan found him humming to himself as he worked. She paused, recognizing the melody, but unable to place it. "Is that a song?" she asked curiously. John stopped, as if caught doing something he shouldn't. "Just something in my head," he mumbled. "Sounds familiar," Megan said, leaning against the counter. "Do you play music?" John hesitated, his brows furrowing as if trying to remember. "I think so," he said finally. "It's hazy, but I can almost see a piano, or maybe a guitar." "Maybe you were a musician," Megan suggested, her curiosity growing. "That would explain the accent. Were you in a band or something?" John shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the questions. "I don't know. It's all fragments." Megan decided to drop the subject, but her mind raced with possibilities. She couldn't help but wonder who John really was and what kind of life he'd led before he ended up on that bench. Later that evening, the diner was winding down when a group of rowdy teenagers came in. They were loud and obnoxious, throwing crumpled napkins at each other and laughing too loudly. John tried to ignore them as he cleaned a nearby table. but one of the boys sneered at him. "Hey, old man, don't you have a bridge to sleep under?" the boy taunted. John stiffened but didn't respond. Megan, who had been refilling a customer's coffee, slammed the pot down on the counter and marched over. "That's enough," she snapped, glaring at the boy. "Apologize, or you can take your food to go." The boy laughed, clearly not expecting resistance, but Megan stood her ground. Finally, he muttered a half-hearted apology before turning back to his friends. "Don't let them get to you," Megan said softly, placing a comforting hand on John's shoulder. John looked at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Megan replied firmly. "You deserve respect just like anyone else." For the first time since she'd met him, John smiled, a real, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Thank you, Megan." "Really?" The next day, something unexpected happened. A diner regular, a retired teacher named Mrs. Hargrove, approached Megan while John was clearing tables. "Your new helper," Mrs. Hargrove said, lowering her voice. "He looks familiar." Megan tilted her head. "Familiar how?" "I'm not sure," Mrs. Hargrove said, her brows knitting together. "But there's something about him. Like I've seen him on TV or in a movie. He has that presence." Megan laughed it off, but her curiosity deepened. Later that night, she found herself scrolling through her phone, searching for anyone who might resemble John. She typed in random keywords: British actors, musicians, missing persons. Nothing seemed to match. But just as she was about to give up, a headline caught her eye. "Hollywood star Johnny Depp missing after boating accident." The article detailed how the actor had disappeared weeks ago after a trip at sea went wrong, and while authorities suspected he was alive, no one had seen or heard from him since. Megan's heart raced as she stared at the photo accompanying the article. The clean-shaven man with sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes looked nothing like John. And yet, there was an undeniable resemblance. "No way," she whispered to herself. "It can't be." She closed her phone, shaking her head. The idea was ridiculous. Why would a Hollywood icon be working at a tiny diner in the middle of nowhere? But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the image of the article or the feeling that her humble new friend was hiding a story much bigger than she could imagine. The diner was unusually quiet the next evening, the hum of conversation and clinking dishes replaced by a strange tension in the air. Megan couldn't focus. The resemblance between John and the photo of Johnny Depp haunted her thoughts. She told herself it was impossible, just a coincidence, but a part of her couldn't let it go. That night, as she was closing up, the bell over the diner door jingled. She turned to see a man in a tailored trench coat and polished shoes step inside. He was out of place in their little town, exuding an aura of importance. His eyes scanned the room before landing on her. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "I'm looking for someone. I've been told I might find him here." Megan crossed her arms, her wariness flaring. "Who are you looking for?" "A man named John," the stranger replied, glancing around the empty diner. "He may not remember who he is." Megan's stomach dropped. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, then pulled a badge from his pocket. "I'm Michael Barnes, a private investigator. I've been hired to locate someone very important, a man who's been missing for weeks. He suffers from amnesia after a boating accident, and we believe he's been hiding in plain sight." Megan's heart pounded. She couldn't deny the eerie similarities between John's story and what this man was saying. Still, she felt a fierce protectiveness rise within her. "How do you know he's here?" she asked cautiously. "Multiple reports," Barnes said. "Descriptions from locals and recent sightings match the man I'm looking for. I have reason to believe John is actually Johnny Depp." The words hung in the air, surreal and impossible. Megan wanted to laugh it off, but the seriousness in Barnes's tone sent a shiver down her spine. When Barnes finally left the diner, Megan found John in the back, organizing the storage room. He turned to greet her, but the look on her face stopped him. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down a box. "John, I need to ask you something," she said, her voice trembling, "and I need you to be honest with me." His brow furrowed. "Of course. What is it?" She hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed him the photo of Johnny Depp from the article. Do you know who this is? John stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. A flicker of something, recognition, confusion, crossed his face, but he quickly looked away. I don't know, he said softly. Should I? Megan stepped closer, her voice urgent. John, there's a private investigator looking for you. He thinks you're this man, Johnny Depp, and honestly, I think he might be right. John backed away, his hands trembling. That's ridiculous. I'm no one. Are you? Megan pressed, her eyes searching his. Think about it. The flashes you told me about, the music, the boat. You hum melodies like they're second nature. And that accent of yours. It's not small-town America. I can't be him, John said, shaking his head. That's insane. It's not, Megan insisted. You don't remember your life, John. What if this is the truth? What if you're not just anyone? What if you're him? John sank onto a nearby crate, his head in his hands. If I am, what then? What kind of life did I leave behind? Who did I hurt? What if I'm better off not knowing? Megan knelt in front of him, her voice softening. You deserve to know who you are. And if this is true, maybe finding out will help you heal. He looked at her, a storm of emotions in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. Okay, I'll meet him, the investigator. But if he's wrong, promise me we'll forget this ever happened. Megan smiled faintly, relief washing over her. Deal. The following day, Barnes returned, this time with a team. A mobile medical van parked discreetly outside the diner, equipped to run tests that would confirm John's identity. Megan stood by nervously as John submitted to the procedures, his usual calm demeanor replaced with visible unease. Blood samples, facial scans, and even voice analysis were taken. Hours passed, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Barnes emerged from the van, holding a folder. He looked at John, his expression a mixture of relief and amazement. It's you, he said simply. You're Johnny Depp. John's face went pale, and he staggered back as if the weight of the words had physically struck him. Megan reached out, steadying him. No, John murmured. That can't be. But the proof was undeniable. The tests, the records, the unmistakable match. John, or Johnny, had been found. For Megan, the moment was surreal. The man she had befriended, helped, and come to care for wasn't just anyone. He was a global icon. But as she looked at him now, stunned and vulnerable, she realized he was still the same person she had met on that cold night. The man who just wanted to find himself. And his journey was far from over. The news spread faster than Megan could process. Within hours, the diner became the epicenter of a media frenzy. Reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers crowded the streets, desperate for a glimpse of Johnny Depp. For Megan, it was a whirlwind. One moment she was serving coffee to regulars, and the next she was surrounded by flashing cameras and microphones. Johnny, as she now had to call him, was struggling to process the revelation. He stayed mostly in the back room, avoiding the chaos outside. Megan found him sitting on a crate, his head buried in his hands, looking more lost than ever. You okay? She asked softly, setting a cup of coffee on the table next to him. He looked up, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know. 1 minute, I'm no one. The next, I'm someone I don't even remember being. Megan sat down beside him. You're still you, Johnny. Whoever you were before, that doesn't change the person you've been these past weeks. Kind, hardworking, humble. He smiled faintly. Humble, not a word people would have used to describe me, I think. Well, maybe this is a second chance, Megan said. A chance to figure out who you want to be now. Johnny nodded but said nothing. He was grappling with a flood of emotions. Relief, confusion, fear. And Megan could only sit beside him, offering what comfort she could. That evening, Barnes returned with a team of representatives and security personnel. They explained the situation to Johnny, offering to help him reconnect with his life and career. He was hesitant, but agreed to go through with it. Before we go any further, Johnny said, his voice steady for the first time all day, I need to know something. What kind of person was I? Was I a good man? Barnes exchanged a glance with one of his colleagues. You've had your ups and downs, he admitted carefully, but you've also brought joy to millions. People love you, Johnny, and more importantly, you have a chance to start fresh. Johnny absorbed the words in silence. After a moment, he turned to Megan. What do you think? Should I go back? Megan was taken aback by the question. Johnny, I can't tell you what to do, but I think the world deserves to know the man I've come to know. The one who worked hard, cared about people, and didn't give up, even when things were hard. His lips curved into a small, grateful smile. You always know the right thing to say. The next day, Megan watched from the sidewalk as Johnny stepped into a sleek black SUV surrounded by security. The crowd erupted in cheers, cameras flashing wildly as the vehicle pulled away. For a moment, she felt an ache of loss, wondering if she'd ever see him again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a text from Johnny. I'll never forget what you did for me, Megan. You gave me my life back. Let's not say goodbye. Just see you later. She smiled, tucking her phone away as the SUV disappeared down the street. It wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. Weeks passed after Johnny's departure, and life at the diner slowly returned to normal. The media frenzy subsided, and Megan found herself wondering if her brief encounter with a Hollywood star had been some kind of dream. But every now and then, a customer would mention that mysterious man or ask Megan about the stories circulating online. She would just smile and change the subject, keeping the truth close to her heart. One chilly afternoon, as she wiped down the counter during a lull, the bell above the diner door jingled. Megan looked up, expecting another regular, but froze in place when she saw who it was. Johnny stood in the doorway, his signature messy hair and easy smile now unmistakable. He looked like himself again, clean-shaven, dressed in a tailored coat, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Johnny, she exclaimed, setting down the rag. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be, I don't know, on a movie set or something? He chuckled, walking toward her. Probably, but I needed to see you first. Megan's heart raced as he pulled up a stool at the counter. Coffee? She asked, trying to mask her nerves. Always, he said with a grin. As she poured, he studied her. How have you been? Me? She said, setting the cup in front of him. Same as always. Work, sleep, repeat. You? Johnny leaned back, his smile fading into something more serious. It's been a lot. Reconnecting with people, relearning my life. It's strange, waking up one day and being famous without remembering how it happened. I can't imagine, Megan said softly, but you seem like you're handling it. Thanks to you, he said, his tone sincere. If you hadn't found me that night, who knows where I'd be? You didn't just save my life, Megan. You reminded me what really matters. She blushed, looking away. I just did what anyone would have done. Not everyone would have, Johnny said firmly. That's why I'm here. I wanted to thank you properly. And to make you an offer. Megan raised an eyebrow. An offer? He nodded, pulling a small envelope from his coat and sliding it across the counter. She opened it, revealing a plane ticket to Los Angeles and a note that simply read, For Megan, because every star needs a friend to keep them grounded. Her mouth fell open. What is this? I want you to come to L.A., Johnny said, his eyes earnest. Work with me. Be part of my team. You're honest, hardworking, and you have a knack for telling me what I need to hear, not what I want to hear. I need that in my life. Megan stared at him, her heart pounding. Johnny, I don't know anything about Hollywood or working for someone like you. You know how to be a good friend, he said. That's all I need. She hesitated, her mind racing with doubts and excitement. Her life in the small town was simple but predictable. This offer was anything but. It was thrilling, terrifying, and completely unexpected. Take some time to think about it, Johnny said, sensing her hesitation. But if you say yes, just know that this isn't about me doing you a favor. You've already done more for me than I can ever repay. This is about me wanting someone I trust by my side. Megan swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding. Okay, I'll think about it. Johnny grinned, sliding off the stool. Good. And if you decide to stay here, that's okay too. but I have a feeling you're destined for more than this diner." That night, Megan sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the plane ticket. She thought about her life, her dreams, and the strange, wonderful turn of events that had brought Johnny into her world. It was a leap into the unknown, but as she held the ticket in her hands, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take that leap. A week later, Megan stood at the airport, clutching her ticket to Los Angeles. She'd said her goodbyes to the diner and her coworkers, including Mr. Parker, who grumbled about finding someone to replace her, but secretly wished her well. As she boarded the plane, her stomach churned with nerves, but she couldn't shake the sense of excitement bubbling underneath. The flight felt surreal. By the time she landed and stepped into the bustling Los Angeles air, she was greeted by a driver holding a sign with her name. Megan couldn't help but chuckle. It felt like a scene from a movie. The driver whisked her away to a sleek black car, which took her through the glittering streets of the city to a hotel that was far grander than anywhere she'd ever stayed. Waiting for her in the lobby was Johnny. He looked relaxed, yet there was an unmistakable brightness in his expression when he saw her. "You made it," he said, pulling her into a warm hug. "Barely," she joked, still overwhelmed by the change of scenery. "This is a lot." "You'll get used to it," he said with a wink. "Come on, there's someone I want you to meet." Johnny introduced Megan to his team, a small, loyal group of people who handled everything from scheduling to media relations. They were warm and welcoming, but it was clear that Megan was there for a different purpose. Johnny explained that her role would be more personal, keeping him grounded, helping him navigate the chaos of his career, and occasionally lending an honest ear. At first, Megan felt out of place. The glamorous events, the high-powered meetings, and the constant presence of paparazzi were nothing like the quiet life she'd known. But Johnny made sure she never felt alone. He included her in every step of the process, introducing her to friends and colleagues who treated her with genuine kindness. One evening, after a particularly long day on set, Johnny and Megan sat on the balcony of his home overlooking the city lights. He poured them both a glass of wine and leaned back in his chair, a rare moment of peace in his whirlwind life. "You're doing great, you know," he said, breaking the silence. Megan laughed, shaking her head. "I feel like I'm just stumbling through all of this." "Maybe," Johnny said with a grin, "but you're stumbling with style. And more importantly, you're helping me remember who I am. I've spent so much of my life playing roles that I forgot what it feels like to just be me." Megan looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and pride. "I think you've always known who you are, Johnny. You just needed a reminder." Months turned into years, and Megan's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She traveled the world with Johnny, met fascinating people, and learned to navigate the complexities of fame. But through it all, she stayed true to herself, never losing the grounded perspective that had drawn Johnny to her in the first place. Johnny, in turn, found a renewed sense of purpose. With Megan by his side, he rediscovered his passion for acting and music, using his platform to support causes close to his heart. In interviews, he often spoke of the mysterious waitress who had changed his life, though he never revealed too much, wanting to protect her privacy. For Megan, the journey wasn't just about helping Johnny, it was about finding her own strength and courage. The shy waitress from the small-town diner had grown into someone confident and fearless, ready to face whatever challenges came her way. One evening back in Los Angeles, Johnny hosted a small gathering of close friends. As Megan mingled with the guests, she overheard Johnny talking to someone about her. "She's my anchor," he said with a fond smile. "In a world where everything feels like it's spinning out of control, Megan reminds me of what really matters." Megan felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had taken a leap of faith when she boarded that plane, and it had led her to a life she never dreamed possible. But more importantly, it had given her a friend she would cherish forever. And as she stood there, surrounded by laughter and music, she realized that her life had taken a surprising turn. Not just overnight, but in every moment since that cold evening when she offered a stranger a warm meal. Thank you so much for watching this story. Your support means everything to us. If you enjoyed it and want to see more inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear from you. What time are you watching this video, and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below and let us know. It's always amazing to see how far our community reaches. And remember, every share, like, or comment helps us spread these powerful stories to more people. Thanks for being part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next one.